The apron was already laid out on my bed when I walked into my old room that morning, folded neatly, like a uniform someone had pressed for me without asking. My name is Kora, I'm 32, and I've spent most of my adult life as a graphic designer working from a converted spare bedroom in my apartment, building a freelance career one client at a time until it finally started to look like something real. That morning, though, I wasn't thinking about branding decks or color palettes. I was standing in my childhood bedroom in my parents' house, staring at a pale blue apron with a cartoon chef printed on the front, while my phone buzzed in my pocket with an email from Meridian Corporation that I hadn't opened yet because I already knew what it would say. It was Saturday. Madison's 30th birthday party, 50 guests, catered by family, meaning catered by me, in our parents' backyard, starting at 4 o'clock. And somewhere between now and 4 o'clock, I was supposed to finalize the single biggest contract of my career, a $240,000 deal that had taken 8 months of work, 3 rounds of revisions, and more sleepless nights than I wanted to count. Kora, honey, you're up. My mother's voice floated up the stairs, bright and certain, the way it always was when she wanted something done and had already decided I'd do it. The caterer canceled, but don't worry, I told everyone you've got it handled. You're so good at this kind of thing. I hadn't said yes yet. I hadn't said anything at all. I picked up the apron, feeling the stiff new fabric between my fingers, and somewhere underneath the part of me that wanted to put it on and go downstairs like I always did, something else, something smaller, but sharper, was already starting to ache. I had no idea that by the end of that day, a man I'd never expected to see in my parents' backyard would be the one to finally say, out loud, in front of everyone, exactly what my work was worth. I just didn't know it yet. All I knew was that I needed to call Christopher Hayes back by noon, and I had 50 place settings to figure out first. The backyard, when I came down, was already half transformed. My father was up on a ladder, stringing lights between the oak trees, whistling some tune I didn't recognize, looking pleased with himself in the way he always did when he felt like he was contributing. Folding tables stood in rows on the lawn, still bare. A stack of rented chairs leaned against the garage. And in the kitchen, my mother was on the phone, laughing at something, her voice carrying that particular warmth she reserved for people outside the family. "Oh, she'll handle it, she always does," I heard her say, and I knew, even before she turned around and saw me standing in the doorway, that she was talking about me. She hung up and smiled. "There you are. I was just telling Carol you'd take care of the appetizers, nothing fancy, just enough for 50 people. You did such a beautiful job at Easter." 50 people. Easter had been 12. "Mom," I said carefully, "I have a really important call today. The Meridian contract, I told you about it last week. I might need to step away around 11, maybe noon." "Oh, that's fine, that's fine." She waved a hand, already moving toward the pantry, pulling out mixing bowls like the conversation was over. "You can do your little design thing in between. It's not like you have to be anywhere, right? You work from home. You work from home." For words that, in my family, had somehow become shorthand for your time doesn't really count. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one I'd learned, over years, not to show on my face. I set the apron down on the counter, still folded, and reached for the coffee pot instead, buying myself a few seconds before I had to answer. "It's not a little design thing," I said quietly. "It's the biggest contract I've ever had." My mother didn't look up from the bowl she was filling with flour. "I know, sweetheart. That's wonderful. But Madison's party only happens once, turning 30 is a big deal, and you know how she gets if things aren't perfect." She glanced at me then, and there was something almost pleading in her expression, though I knew from experience it wasn't really a request. "You're so flexible. It's such a gift, honestly." "A gift?" I almost laughed. Instead, I poured my coffee and said nothing, because saying something had never, not once in 32 years, changed the outcome. I told myself, the way I always did, that today, just like every other day, it was easier to just say yes and get it over with. I didn't know yet how wrong that would turn out to be. By 9 in the morning, I had a list. My mother handed it to me on a torn sheet of notebook paper, written in her loose, looping handwriting, the kind of list that always seemed to grow longer the moment you started checking things off. Appetizers for 50. A vegetarian option, because apparently 3 of Madison's coworkers were vegetarian now. A cake run to the bakery downtown, could I pick it up, since I was already going to be in and out anyway? Folding napkins into the little fan shapes Madison liked. Setting up the dessert table. Making sure there was enough ice. I read through it twice, standing at the kitchen counter, my coffee going cold beside me. This is a lot for one person, I said, mostly to myself. Madison's coming by around 2 to help, my mother said, not looking up from the recipe card she was reading. She just has a few things to finish at the office first. A few things to finish at the office. On a Saturday. For her own birthday party. I didn't say anything, because what was there to say? This was the rhythm of my family, the one I'd grown up inside of so completely that for years I hadn't even noticed it had a shape. Madison's time was important, scheduled, protected. Mine was elastic. It stretched to fill whatever space was needed, and nobody ever seemed to wonder what got squeezed out in the process. I started on the appetizers around 10. My phone sat propped against the spice rack, screen angled so I could see it while I worked, waiting for the email I knew was coming. Christopher Hayes, Meridian's VP of Brand Development, had told me on Thursday that he'd have final sign-off from his board sometime Friday or Saturday morning, and that once it came through, he wanted to set up a call to walk through next steps. Next steps. After 8 months, after 3 full rebrand concepts, after a final round of revisions, I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. finishing twice that week. Next steps meant the deal was real. It meant the number I'd been almost afraid to think about, $240,000, the largest single contract of my entire career, more than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined, was about to become something I could actually put my name on. I cracked eggs for deviled eggs, sliced cucumbers for little canapes, and tried to keep my hands steady while my mind kept drifting back to the email that hadn't come yet. Around 11, my phone buzzed. Not Hayes, my father, calling from the backyard, even though he was close enough that I could see him through the window. Hey, kiddo, you mind running to the hardware store? We're short on extension cords for the lights, and I want to test the sound system before people start showing up. I looked down at the half-finished tray of deviled eggs, at the cucumbers still waiting to be sliced, at the clock on the oven, 11:14. Dad, I'm right in the middle of. It'll take 20 minutes, tops. You're so much faster at this stuff than I am. He laughed, easy and warm, the way he always did, like the request itself was a compliment. Madison's going to want everything perfect when she gets here. I looked at the tray again. Then I wiped my hands, grabbed my keys, and went. The hardware store was busier than I expected for a Saturday morning, and by the time I found extension cords, paid, and drove back, it was nearly noon. My phone still hadn't buzzed. I told myself that was fine. Hayes had said sometime Friday or Saturday, and it was still morning. I had time. When I got back, the appetizer trays were exactly where I'd left them, untouched, the cucumbers starting to sweat slightly on the cutting board. My mother was on the phone again, this time with my aunt, talking animatedly about Madison's promotion. She was up for partner at her law firm, something everyone in the family had been talking about for weeks, in the careful, reverent tone usually reserved for things that mattered. She's worked so hard, my mother was saying. 8 years at that firm, and now this. We're just so proud of her. 8 years. I'd been building my freelance business for almost the same length of time, longer, if you counted the years I'd spent doing small jobs for almost nothing while I built a portfolio. Nobody had ever said they were proud of that. Not in those words. Not in any words, really. I went back to the cucumbers. Sliced, scooped, arranged. My phone sat silent. It was nearly 1 when Madison finally arrived, not at 2, like she'd said, but early, which surprised me until I saw her face. She came through the back door already talking, her blazer still on, her heels clicking against the kitchen tile, phone pressed to her ear. No, tell them I'll have the brief finished by Monday morning. I just need. She paused, covering the phone with her hand, and looked at the appetizer trays with a small frown. Kora, are those the deviled eggs? I told Mom I wanted the ones with the little paprika design on top, not just plain. You didn't tell me that, I said. I told Mom. Madison shrugged, already turning away, phone back at her ear. I figured she'd pass it along. She disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom, still talking, her voice fading into the rest of the house. I stood there for a moment, looking at the eggs, perfectly fine, perfectly edible, and apparently wrong, and felt something small and cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter than that. Something closer to recognition. This is how it's always going to be, I thought. No matter how much I do, it's never quite what they wanted, and somehow, that's always my fault. I didn't dwell on it. I never did. I picked up the paprika and started over. By 2:30, the appetizers were done, paprika design and all, and I was setting up the dessert table when my phone finally buzzed. Christopher Hayes, good news on our end, board approved final terms this morning. Can we hop on a call this afternoon to go over the contract details before I send it for signatures? Say 4 p.m.? 4 o'clock. The exact moment the party was scheduled to start. I stood there in the dining room, holding my phone, feeling my heart do something strange, a kind of lift and drop at the same time. 8 months of work. The biggest deal of my life. And it was happening at the worst possible moment, in a house full of people who didn't know it was happening at all. I typed back quickly, that's great news. I have a family event starting at 4, is there any way we could push to tomorrow morning, or do a quick call this evening instead? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Totally understand, family first. How about I send over the final contract draft now so you can review it tonight, and we can do a quick call tomorrow morning to finalize. Congrats again, Kora, this is going to be a great partnership. Relief washed through me, warm and sudden. Tomorrow morning. I could do that. I could get through today, get through this party, and tomorrow morning I could sit down with a clear head and finally. Kora, can you grab the cake from the bakery now? They close at 3, and if you don't go now we'll have to drive across town to the other location. My mother again, appearing in the doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, already moving on to the next item before I'd even responded to the last one. I looked down at my phone. The contract draft hadn't come through yet. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to wait for it before I left. Yeah, I said. I'm going. The bakery was 15 minutes away, and the drive there was the first quiet I'd had all day. I turned the radio off and just sat with the silence, replaying Hayes's message, letting myself feel, just for a moment, what it actually meant. $240,000. A contract that would change everything, my client roster, my rates, the way people in my industry would look at my name from now on. I'd worked toward this for years, through every job that paid too little, every client who didn't value what I did, every late night spent teaching myself new software because nobody was going to teach me. This is real, I thought, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. This is actually happening. And then, underneath that thought, quieter, and nobody back at that house has any idea. It wasn't resentment, exactly. Not yet. It was something closer to loneliness, the specific, particular loneliness of carrying something enormous and having nowhere to set it down. I picked up the cake, a 3-tier confection with Madison's name in gold lettering, Happy 30th, Madison. And drove back, balancing it carefully on the passenger seat, the box sliding slightly on every turn. By the time I got back to the house, it was nearly 3:30, and the backyard had transformed completely. String lights glowed against the early evening sky. Guests were beginning to arrive in small clusters, balloons tied to the fence posts, my father's playlist drifting out through the open patio doors. I carried the cake inside and set it carefully on the counter, and that's when I saw it, my phone, lit up on the counter where I'd left it, 3 new notifications. The first was the contract draft from Hayes, a PDF attachment, meridian_brand_dev_final contract_Kora.pdf. I felt my pulse quicken just looking at it. The second was a text from Hayes himself, sent the draft over, take your time tonight. One more thing, if you're free, I'm actually going to be in your area this evening for a separate meeting, ends around 5. If it's not too much trouble, I'd love to swing by briefly afterward and hand you a physical copy with our updated branding materials, call it a small celebration. No pressure at all if today's busy, just let me know. I read it twice, my stomach doing something complicated. Hayes, coming here. Tonight. To my parents' house, where I had told no one, not a single person, what today actually meant for me. The third notification was a missed call from an unknown number, no voicemail. I stood there for a long moment, the cake box still in my hands, the party noise swelling behind me, and felt two entirely different versions of my life pressing against each other for the first time, the one happening in this kitchen, where I was the daughter who handled things, and the one waiting in my phone, where I was someone whose work had just been valued at $250,000. Don't tell anyone, I thought. Not yet. Not until it's official. I didn't know, standing there, that the decision wouldn't be mine to make for much longer. I texted Hayes back while I was still standing at the counter, my thumb moving faster than I wanted it to. That's so kind, thank you. I'm actually at a family event right now, my sister's birthday party, but if you're already in the area, you're more than welcome to stop by. It's pretty casual. I almost didn't send it. For a second, my finger hovered over the message, and I thought about all the reasons not to, about how strange it would feel to have my professional life walk into my parents' backyard, about how my mother would react to a stranger showing up, about how I'd have to explain who he was and why he was here and what, exactly, this contract even meant. But underneath all of that was something else. A small, stubborn voice that said, why shouldn't he come? Why should I have to hide this, today of all days? I sent it. His reply came a few minutes later, perfect, I'll swing by around 6, won't stay long, promise. Looking forward to celebrating with you, even briefly. I put my phone in my back pocket and carried the cake out to the dessert table, and for the next hour, I let the party absorb me the way it always did. I refilled drink coolers. I directed confused guests toward the bathroom. I made small talk with my aunt about her garden, with my father's co-workers about the weather, with a woman I didn't recognize who turned out to be one of Madison's law school friends, recently engaged, eager to talk about wedding venues. And what do you do? She asked me at one point, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, smiling politely. I'm a graphic designer, I said. I run my own freelance business, branding, mostly, for small and mid-sized companies. Oh, that's fun, she said, in the bright, slightly distracted way people say things they don't really mean. Like, making logos and stuff? Sometimes, I said. Lately it's been bigger projects, full brand identity work. Strategy, not just visuals. That's so nice that you can do that from home, she said, already glancing past me toward the dessert table. Must be nice to have such a flexible schedule. Flexible schedule. There it was again, that phrase, the one my family used like a verdict, the one that always seemed to mean, your work doesn't have edges. It can be cut, rearranged, set aside, and nobody owes you an apology for any of it. I smiled, said something polite, and excused myself to refill the ice. Around 5:30, my mother found me in the kitchen, where I was washing dishes that had already accumulated, used appetizer trays, sticky lemonade pitchers, a stack of small plates someone had abandoned on the counter. Kora, can I ask you something? She said, in a tone that I recognized immediately, the one that always preceded a request dressed up as a question. Madison's toast is in about an hour, and we wanted to do a little slideshow first, pictures from her life, you know, growing up, law school, all of that. Do you think you could put something together? You're so good with that kind of thing. I turned off the faucet. Mom. The party's already started. You want me to make a slideshow, now? Just something simple. You always make these things look so professional. She said it warmly, like it was a gift she was giving me, an opportunity, rather than yet another task piled onto a day that already felt impossibly full. I thought about saying no. I actually thought about it, really thought about it, standing there with soapy hands, feeling the shape of the word in my mouth. No, Mom. I can't. I have a contract to review tonight, and a man from the company I'm signing with is going to be here in less than an hour, and I am exhausted, and I have been on my feet since 8 this morning, and I would like, for once, to just exist at this party as a guest. But I didn't say it. Because somewhere underneath all of it, there was still that old, familiar hope, the one I'd carried for years without ever quite naming it. The hope that if I just did this one more thing, if I kept being the person who could be counted on, eventually, someone would notice. Someone would say, Kora does so much for this family. Kora deserves better than this. Nobody ever had. But the hope was still there, stubborn and quiet, the way it always was. I'll see what I can do, I said. I spent the next 40 minutes hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, scrolling through old family photos my mother had texted me in a disorganized batch, throwing together a slideshow with whatever transitions and music I could find quickly. My phone buzzed twice more during that time, once from Hayes, confirming he was on his way, and once from a number I didn't recognize, which I let go to voicemail because I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with one more thing. When I finally finished the slideshow and looked up, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the backyard was full, 50 people, easily, spilling across the lawn, drinks in hand, laughter rising and falling in waves. My father was testing the sound system. My mother was directing 2 of Madison's friends toward the gift table. And Madison herself stood near the center of it all, glowing in a way I rarely saw her, surrounded by people congratulating her, on the party, on turning 30, on the partnership announcement everyone seemed to already know was coming. I stood in the kitchen doorway, looking out at all of it, still in the apron my mother had laid out that morning, my hands smelling faintly of dish soap, and felt something I hadn't expected, not envy, exactly, but a kind of ache. A wish, small, and a little embarrassing, that just once, someone would look at me the way they were looking at her. That's when I saw him. A man in a gray suit, standing near the side gate, looking slightly out of place among the casual party clothes, scanning the crowd like he was looking for someone. Christopher Hayes had arrived. I almost didn't go to him right away. For one strange, suspended moment, I just stood there in the doorway, watching him scan the crowd, a tall man in his 50s, gray suit slightly rumpled from a day of meetings, a slim leather folder tucked under one arm, and I thought about all the ways I could keep this contained. I could go out, greet him quietly, take the folder, thank him, and steer him gently back toward the gate before anyone noticed. I could keep these 2 worlds separate, the way I always had. But before I could move, my mother spotted him. "Oh, hello," she called out, already walking toward him with the easy, practiced warmth she used on strangers, the hostess voice. "Are you a friend of Madison's? Please, come in, there's plenty of food." "Actually," Hayes said, smiling, glancing past her toward the kitchen doorway, where I was still standing, frozen, "I'm looking for Kora." "I believe this is her family's place?" My mother turned, surprised, and found me in the doorway. "Kora? You know this gentleman?" There was no good way to explain it quickly, not in front of everyone, not with my mother's curious expression and the way several nearby guests had already started to glance over, drawn by the small ripple of who is this that moves through any party when someone unexpected arrives. So I did the only thing I could think of, I walked over, peeling off the apron as I went, draping it over a chair. "Mom, this is Christopher Hayes," I said. "He's the VP of Brand Development at Meridian Corporation. We've been working together on a project." "Oh." My mother's eyebrows lifted, polite and slightly blank, the way they always did when I mentioned work, a reaction that acknowledged the words without absorbing their meaning. "How nice. Are you 2 colleagues?" "Something like that," Hayes said, and then, turning to me with a warm, easy smile, he held out the leather folder. "I won't stay long, I promise, I know this is a family thing. But I wanted to drop this off in person." He glanced at my mother, then back at me, his expression open, friendly, completely unaware of the ground he was about to walk on. $240,000, finalized, that's a milestone worth celebrating, even if it's just for 5 minutes. For a moment, nobody said anything. I felt the words land, $240,000, and felt them ripple outward, the way a stone disturbs still water, the small circle of people standing near us all turning, slightly, toward the sound of a number that big. My mother's smile didn't fade, exactly. It just paused. Froze, slightly, at the edges. "I'm sorry," she said, with a small, confused laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they think there's been a misunderstanding. 240,000? For Cora's little design thing? There it was. The phrase I'd been braced for my whole life without ever knowing I was braced for it, said out loud, in front of everyone, to the one person in the world who could prove, instantly and completely, that it was wrong. Hayes's smile shifted, not gone, but recalibrated, the expression of a man realizing he'd stepped into something he didn't fully understand. Well, it's not really a little anything, he said, carefully. Kora led the entire rebrand for our flagship division. New visual identity, brand strategy, market positioning, the whole package. Our board reviewed 3 other agencies before we landed on her work. Frankly, we're lucky to have her. We're bringing her on as our lead creative consultant going forward, which is a fairly significant role for us. The backyard had gone quieter than I'd realized. Not silent, but quieter, the way a room gets when something unexpected is happening and people are pretending not to notice while listening very closely. I didn't realize, my mother said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I watched her search for words and not find them. It was Madison who broke the silence, Madison, who had drifted over from the center of the party, drink in hand, drawn by the same ripple everyone else had felt. "Wait," she said, looking between Hayes and me, a small, sharp laugh escaping her. "This is the contract you've been talking about? The one you mentioned, like, last week?" She looked at our mother, and there was something almost defensive in her voice now, like she'd been caught off guard and didn't like it. "I thought it was just, I don't know, a small project." "You didn't say it was." "I told you it was the biggest contract of my career," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "I told both of you." "More than once." "Well, I mean, you say that about a lot of things," Madison said, and the moment the words left her mouth, I saw something flicker across her face, a flash of recognition, almost, like she'd heard how it sounded only after it was already out. Hayes looked between us, clearly sensing now that he'd walked into something far more complicated than a quick congratulatory drop-off. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No," I said, and I turned to him, and for the first time all day, I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not quite, but something close to it. Something clear. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." I took the folder from his hands, held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, actual physical weight, paper and a leather cover, representing 8 months of my life. "Thank you for bringing this." "I mean that." He nodded, still looking a little uncertain, glancing toward the gate. I'll let you all get back to the party." "Congratulations again, Kora." "Truly." He gave a small, awkward wave to my mother and Madison, and made his way back toward the side gate, walking a little faster than he'd walked in. And then it was just us, my mother, my father, who had drifted over during the commotion and now stood with his hands in his pockets, looking between us with the particular helplessness of a man who senses a storm but doesn't know which direction it's coming from, and Madison, and me, standing in the middle of 50 guests who were all, very obviously, trying very hard to look like they weren't listening. I looked down at the apron, still draped over the chair where I'd left it. Pale blue, with its cartoon chef, still smelling faintly of the kitchen. I picked it up. And I held it out to my mother. "I'm done," I said. "I'm done cooking, cleaning, running errands, and putting together slideshows while you tell people my work is a hobby. I have been doing this, all of it, for years. And today, you found out, in front of 50 people, exactly what that hobby is actually worth. And your first reaction wasn't "I'm proud of you." It was "I'm sorry." My mother's face had gone pale. "Kora, I didn't mean." "I know you didn't mean it like that," I said. "That's the problem. You didn't mean anything by it, because you never have to think about it. It's just how things are. How they've always been." I set the apron down on the chair, gently, deliberately. Then I turned, and I walked toward the gate, past the rows of folding tables, past the string lights, past 50 guests and a half-finished cake with Madison's name on it in gold, and I didn't look back. I drove home with the contract folder on the passenger seat, and I didn't cry until I was sitting in my own kitchen, alone, with the lights off. It wasn't sadness, exactly, or it wasn't only sadness. It was something more complicated than that. Relief and grief, tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Relief, because for the first time in my adult life, I had said the thing I'd spent years not saying. Grief, because saying it meant admitting how long I'd waited, and how much I'd given away in the waiting. I built a career good enough to silence a room, I thought, sitting there in the dark, and it still took a stranger saying a number out loud for anyone to believe me. I thought about all the years before this one, every holiday I'd spent in someone else's kitchen, every little project I'd let slide because correcting people felt exhausting, every time I'd told myself that staying quiet was easier, kinder, the path of least resistance. I had told myself, for years, that if I just kept showing up, kept being useful, kept proving my worth through what I did rather than what I said, eventually it would be enough. Eventually someone would see it. I understand now, I thought, that I wasn't being patient. I was being invisible, and calling it patience so it wouldn't hurt as much. That night, I signed the Meridian contract. $240,000, a new title, lead creative consultant, and the kind of professional validation I'd spent a decade working toward. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly, I just felt tired, in the deep, bone-level way that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, nothing, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. I threw myself into the new contract, into the work that had always been the one place I felt entirely, unambiguously myself. I told a few close friends what had happened, and their reactions, the wide eyes, the "he said what" in front of everyone, helped me see the scene from outside, helped me understand that what had happened in that backyard wasn't an overreaction. It was 32 years, finally reaching its breaking point. The letter came at the start of the 4th week, an actual letter, handwritten, in my mother's looping script, the same handwriting that had written that grocery list of party tasks a month earlier. I almost didn't open it. But I did, sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built that slideshow, where I'd opened Hayes's contract draft. I looked down at the apron, still draped over the chair where I'd left it. Pale blue, with its cartoon chef, still smelling faintly of the kitchen. I picked it up. And I held it out to my mother. "I'm done," I said. "I'm done cooking, cleaning, running errands, and putting together slideshows while you tell people my work is a hobby. I have been doing this, all of it, for years. And today, you found out, in front of 50 people, exactly what that hobby is actually worth. And your first reaction wasn't "I'm proud of you." It was "I'm sorry." My mother's face had gone pale. "Kora, I didn't mean." "I know you didn't mean it like that," I said. "That's the problem. You didn't mean anything by it, because you never have to think about it. It's just how things are. How they've always been." I set the apron down on the chair, gently, deliberately. Then I turned, and I walked toward the gate, past the rows of folding tables, past the string lights, past 50 guests and a half-finished cake with Madison's name on it in gold, and I didn't look back. I drove home with the contract folder on the passenger seat, and I didn't cry until I was sitting in my own kitchen, alone, with the lights off. It wasn't sadness, exactly, or it wasn't only sadness. It was something more complicated than that. Relief and grief, tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Relief, because for the first time in my adult life, I had said the thing I'd spent years not saying. Grief, because saying it meant admitting how long I'd waited, and how much I'd given away in the waiting. I built a career good enough to silence a room, I thought, sitting there in the dark, and it still took a stranger saying a number out loud for anyone to believe me. I thought about all the years before this one, every holiday I'd spent in someone else's kitchen, every little project I'd let slide because correcting people felt exhausting, every time I'd told myself that staying quiet was easier, kinder, the path of least resistance. I had told myself, for years, that if I just kept showing up, kept being useful, kept proving my worth through what I did rather than what I said, eventually it would be enough. Eventually someone would see it. I understand now, I thought, that I wasn't being patient. I was being invisible, and calling it patience so it wouldn't hurt as much. That night, I signed the Meridian contract. $240,000, a new title, lead creative consultant, and the kind of professional validation I'd spent a decade working toward. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly, I just felt tired, in the deep, bone-level way that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, nothing, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. I threw myself into the new contract, into the work that had always been the one place I felt entirely, unambiguously myself. I told a few close friends what had happened, and their reactions, the wide eyes, the he said what in front of everyone, helped me see the scene from outside, helped me understand that what had happened in that backyard wasn't an overreaction. It was 32 years, finally reaching its breaking point. The letter came at the start of the 4th week, an actual letter, handwritten, in my mother's looping script, the same handwriting that had written that grocery list of party tasks a month earlier. I almost didn't open it. But I did, sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built that slideshow, where I'd opened Hayes's contract draft. Kora, it began. I've had a lot of time to think, and I owe you more than an apology, though I want to start with one. I'm sorry. Not just for what I said that day, but for years of not seeing what you do, and not seeing you. Your father and I have been talking, and we started seeing someone, a family counselor, which I know probably sounds strange coming from me. But I wanted you to know that. I'm not asking you to come back to how things were. I don't think things should go back to how they were. I just wanted you to know that I heard you, even if it took me far too long. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry this time, I think I'd already done most of that crying in the weeks before. But I sat with it for a long time, turning it over, trying to figure out what I felt. What I felt, in the end, was something quiet. Not forgiveness, not yet, not fully. But the door, which I'd closed without quite meaning to slam it, was no longer locked from the inside. It was almost 3 months before I saw my mother again, a deliberate 3 months, time I'd needed not to punish anyone, but to figure out who I was when I wasn't constantly bracing for the next request. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, my choice, my timing. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in some other way, like some of the certainty she'd always carried had been worn down. We talked carefully, the way people do when they're rebuilding something from pieces and aren't sure yet which pieces fit. She asked about the Meridian project, really asked, with actual questions, the kind that meant she'd listen to the answers. I told her about it. It felt strange, and a little wonderful, to talk about my work and have someone actually want to know. I know I can't undo years, she said, near the end, turning her coffee cup slowly between her hands. But I'd like to try to do better. If you'll let me. I'd like that too, I said. But it has to actually be different. Not just nicer words around the same thing. I know, she said. I know. We didn't fix everything that day. Madison and I are still finding our way back to something. She made partner 6 months later, after a year of growth I genuinely didn't expect, and when she called to tell me, there was something different in her voice, something that sounded, for the first time, like she was telling me because she wanted me to know, not because she expected me to be impressed. As for me, the Meridian contract led to 2 more, and then 3, and these days I don't take on work I don't believe in, and I don't apologize for the price of my time. I still go to family dinners sometimes. I don't wear the apron anymore. Nobody's offered it to me again, and if they did, I think we both know what I'd say. Some debts, it turns out, you can't fully repay. But you can stop adding to them. And sometimes, that's enough to build something new on top of. What's strange, looking back, is that the moment everything changed wasn't really about the money at all, though the money was what made it impossible to ignore. $240,000 is a number large enough to cut through decades of habit in about 4 seconds, which is exactly what it did. But the number itself wasn't the revelation. The revelation was watching how quickly everyone's understanding of Kora shifted the instant an outside authority validated what she'd been saying, unheard, for years, and realizing that the only thing that had ever been missing wasn't proof. It was willingness. Kora's family wasn't a family of villains. That's part of what makes the story land the way it does. Robert's requests were framed as compliments: "You're so much faster at this, you're so good at this kind of thing," which is precisely why they were so hard to refuse. Diane's dismissiveness wasn't cruelty in the dramatic sense, it was the quieter, more corrosive kind, built from decades of treating creative work as something adjacent to real careers, something flexible enough to be endlessly rearranged. And Madison's blindness to her sister's contributions wasn't malice, it was the blindness of someone who had never had to notice, because the machinery had always run smoothly without her attention. That's what made it so hard for Kora to name the problem for so long. There was no single villainous act to point to, no betrayal in the traditional sense, no lie uncovered, no affair. Just an accumulation, years of small dismissals, each one too minor on its own to justify the conversation Kora kept avoiding, but together forming something heavy enough to define an entire family role. The accumulation effect is the real engine of this story, not one moment of injustice, but 1,000 small ones, compounding until the apron itself, that ordinary piece of fabric, became unbearable to hold. The turning point wasn't the confrontation. It was earlier. It was the moment Kora chose to invite Christopher Hayes to the party at all. That decision, made quietly, almost on impulse, was the first time in the entire story that Kora let her 2 worlds touch without trying to control how they'd interact. Everything that followed was simply what happens when you stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own visibility. What's left unresolved, and deliberately so, is whether Kora's family would have changed at all without that public moment. Diane's letter suggests real reflection, therapy, genuine listening, but it came only after the cost of not changing became impossible to ignore. Would 3 weeks of silence have been enough on their own? Or did it take the humiliation, the audience, the number spoken aloud by someone with no emotional stake in the family at all? The story doesn't pretend to know. It simply shows what happened, and lets the audience sit with the uncomfortable possibility that sometimes, people only change when the alternative becomes too expensive to bear, and that this, too, is a kind of love, even if it's a flawed and overdue one. What stays with me most isn't the apron, or the contract, or even the silence afterward, it's how ordinary every single moment leading up to that backyard had felt while it was happening. No one moment seemed worth a fight. That's how these things survive for so long, not through drama, but through 1,000 reasonable-sounding requests that never quite get questioned. Maybe the real lesson isn't about families, or money, or who said what in front of whom. Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just this: the people who love us don't always see us clearly, not because they don't care, but because they've never had to look. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is finally make them look. Not out of cruelty. Just out of necessity. And then, quietly, without fanfare, you keep building the life that was yours all along.